Hey everybody. So I want to sit down for some real talk just for 2 seconds, and my very short disclaimer is that I've been living in Canada for 36 years. I've been in Serbia now for 25 days. I have a limited perspective. It's obviously biased. It's possible that it will change, and I don't know a better way to explain it. So I'm just going to be frank with you, so that you can hear it how it is. You judge it. You do whatever it is that you want with it, and then we'll take it from there. Serbia seems to have this understanding that Canada is amazing. It's glorious for some reason. And I think that living in one country and looking at another country, whether it be Canada and Serbia or any other country in this world, it's natural for a human who has not been in both of them to either look at the other country and look down on it or to glorify it. And that is a limited perspective because you haven't been there. And then being there, like myself coming to Serbia and being here for 25 days, is still limited because I was not here in 99, I was not here in 2012, and I have not been here for the last 36 years. There's no way for me to understand what it's like to live here. But spending some time on Balkan TikTok and watching YouTube videos about Serbia and Belgrade, from two different perspectives now. From the Canadian perspective, when I was living in Canada, looking into Serbia, and then being here and seeing what people want to talk about and what they're thinking and feeling, has given me some opinions. Okay, so Serbia seems to glorify Canada, and I couldn't possibly understand why. And one thing that happened that was very specific in particular was that when I was watching like Balkan TikToks, I would see people be like, "Oh, only Balkan kids will understand," and then it's a slide of pictures showing, babas, little white things on top of the table, and people reusing plastic water bottles and not knowing if there's booze in it or water in it. That attitude of the Balkan dad with the toothpick, and the big belly, and walking out, onto the balcony and drinking a coffee and lighting up a cigarette because that's their breakfast, and getting smacked around by their parents, with belts and sticks and twigs and shoes and just whatever your parent can find to throw at you. The run down and decrepit, playgrounds where, I don't know, the teeter totter looks like a death trap type of situation. Street dogs chasing you, and these types of things. The food that, like a Balkan family might eat, for example. And okay, here's another one: sleeping on chairs, instead of a bed, because you either don't have a bed or whatever the case, or being able to sleep through, vacuums and gunshots and, other traffic noise and whatever else, because you can sleep through anything, or like not being afraid of stuff. Like you guys know that I'm telling you about your Balkan childhood right now. And I this is the part where I don't know how to say this nicely. I just know how to say it honestly. That was my childhood. That was my childhood. And the common denominator, I believe, is being poor. It's the lack of opportunity, right? I lived in a place in Canada that had maybe 2,000 people. I think at its maximum, Sussex of New Brunswick, okay? So that's the east side of Canada. It's a lot of, there's some hills, there's lakes and rivers, there's the ocean and stuff around, like, maybe the east side of New Brunswick and around like PEI and stuff. And Newfoundland is an island, right? And that whole side of Canada is very tiny, very, very tiny. And Sussex was a valley in between two cities. And so you had Moncton over here, which had, I don't know, maybe a couple 100,000 people, or even less, maybe 100,000 people. And then you had St. John, which was relatively large. I don't know, maybe 100,000 people or something. I'm taking a guess here. I'll check it in a second. And Sussex was this on top of the regular land. There was this valley that kind of dug down, and Sussex was this little town right in the middle. And the farmers would use all the land going up the hills in order to make dairy products. So, excuse me, butter, milk, cheese was basically everything that Sussex would export to the large cities in order to make money to support the people that were in that town. Relatively religious, a lot of traditional values, and 2,000 people is not a lot of people. So this is 2,000 people, including young people, right? Children, okay, young families, moderately aged families, like a 30 or old family with older children, maybe 15 to 25, and then their grandparents, and then their grandparents, right? So, in a lot of households in Sussex, when I was a little kid, we're talking about like three generations in one home, a minimum of two generations in one home. And so, when I was brought up, I didn't have my dad around, and my dad would have to go truck. And so, he would work for a company called Sudbury, and he would go from Sussex and he would cross the American border to the south, and he would go to Maine and some other places, right? I was too young, so I don't really know. And he would truck wood chips, so like trees that are just like chopped into like little pieces of wood, made for, I don't know, construction, sawdust, creating fire, whatever it is. I don't know. So he would truck wood chips, and he would send checks. He would send money back to my mother in Sussex to be able to take care of us. We lived at our probably at our lowest time on what at the time was I think about like 12 or $13,000. So I don't know what that would be equivalent to today, but I know that Canada's minimum wage right now is about 14 or $15. It's like $14, I think, Canadian per hour. And $14 will give you probably about twice that in thousands. So $14 an hour is $28,000 a year. Of that $28,000 a year, you have to subtract your taxes, which is about 30% for most people, 25 to 30%. So $28,000 ends up becoming like $20 to $22,000. And rent today is approximately, for a one bedroom home, anywhere between $1,500 to $2,000 for a one bedroom home, for a one bedroom apartment. And so $22,000 is not enough to pay for your rent in most cases. Anyways, so living back in 1995 or 1996 or whatever it was, maybe even younger, in a place with, two, three, 4,000 people max ever, of all of these generations on very low income, where the entire town was owned by somebody. You had two classes of people. You had the people that had been living there for 200 years, 150 years, 100 years, and they owned everything. They owned the banks, they owned the restaurants, they owned the shops, they owned whatever. We didn't have any malls. I remember we had a Zellers. Zellers is like a department store. And this is prior to when the company Walmart came in, an American company. And there were only two large stores in the entirety of Sussex. There was Zellers and there was Home Depot, which I'm not sure if it was a Home Depot, but I know it was a home hardware store. And that's all there was, right? And so I grew up very much in that Balkan kid lifestyle. I remember there was one time I was living with my grandmother, and we didn't have chairs or beds. I slept in a bathtub. I remember sleeping in the bathtub. I remember putting the pillow up and having and it was cold, right? Like, it's not comfortable, so you got to put a blanket in the bathtub, and you can lay down in the bathtub because at least it gives you like a place to sleep. And for some reason, this was better than sleeping on the floor, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, and the majority of my childhood was spent outside with animals in the forest, running on farmers' fields, biking, drinking, smoking, like so. The reason I'm telling you all of this is one, because I think it's interesting to share a story with you guys. I want you to see that there are similarities between a Canadian's childhood in the 90s, because I was born in 86. So there's a similarity of a child growing up in the 90s to some of these like Balkan kids, and I don't know when they're referring to. I don't think they're so much referring to today, but maybe if they're 20, 30 years old and they're talking about like their childhood, which was, let's say, like 15 years ago, for example, we're nearly 2025, so this would have been like early 2000s or something. So like in the 90s and the early 2000s, approximately the same time. And I think it's really interesting to understand that, because there's nothing particularly interesting about Canada. There's nothing necessarily to glorify. And what Juliana or Giuliano was saying was that being poor or making less than the average, salary or yearly income or hourly wage anywhere. Doesn't matter if you're in Canada or in Toronto, Montreal, if you're in New York, if you're in the United States, or if you're in Serbia or Germany or France, making less than the average will suck. That's it. That's all there is to it. It doesn't matter where you live. And if you make more than the average, then it's probably pretty decent for you. And the part that I don't know if I'm kind of spoiled being a Canadian is that I don't think so much that in Serbia there is a lack of money. I don't necessarily think that there is. I think. Okay, let me back up for a second. I think that the majority of the issue is that there's not necessarily enough opportunity, because maybe people are not interested in the opportunity, right? So, as an example, let me try to pick something.